All right. In 2004, Green Day, a California-based punk band, released the rock opera concept album American Idiot. The album detailed the band's leftist politics during the first George W. Bush administration, and its success revived their career after the unfavored warning. As a concept album, each track on American Idiot connects to an overarching narrative, and Green Day employs various musical techniques to portray this story. In this chapter, I will focus specifically on the role of rhythmic dissonance in the development of the album's narrative. American Idiot details the journey of Jesus of Suburbia, or Jesus. The album opens with him living in the suburbs, being bored of that life, and feeling like he does not fit in. He then moves to the city to make a new life for himself. In the city, Jesus creates an alter ego, Saint Jimmy, falls into the wrong crowd called the Waiting, and becomes addicted to drugs. While there, he meets and begins dating a girl, What's Her Name. After an unspecified amount of time, What's Her Name breaks up with Jesus, sending him spiraling into a depression. Eventually, Jesus makes the decision to move back home to the suburbs and years later reflects on What's Her Name and his time spent in the city. As you can see, Table 1 details the role of each song in the album. So we can see the first track is the title track, American Idiot. It sets up the exposition but does not actually start the story. Jesus of Suburbia takes place in the suburbs, and then Holiday, all the way through Wake Me Up When September Ends, happens in the city, and then Homecoming details his journey coming home, and What's Her Name functions sort of as an epilogue to the end of the story. Pivoting to the rhythmic aspects, Green Day utilizes a trio rhythm to represent feelings of freedom from societal norms that I will call the outcast motif. The trio is a rhythm with a 3-3-2 durational pattern. Trio rhythms can first be divided into two types, first and second order trios, as coined by Jesse Kinney. Two dotted eighth notes and one regular eighth note comprise a first order trio rhythm, and this causes the least disruption. Greater disruption occurs by moving up the order where the trio rhythm is present, such as the second order trio, which consists of dotted quarter and quarter notes. Another way the trio rhythm can cause more or less metric dissonance is doubling the amount of iteration, and these are called single and double trios. The single trio is defined above as a 3-3-2, and the double trio repeats each successive duration to create a 3-3-3-3-2-2 pattern. Thus, the double trio and second order trio cause more dissonance because there is more time spent in syncopation. While a first order single trio only takes up the space of a half note before syncing with beats 1 or 3, assuming it begins on beats 1 and 3. The first order double trio and the second order single trio both span an entire measure, thus doubling the disruption to the beat. Building off this logic, the second order double trio would cause even more disruption, and so on. Shown here, for the purposes of this presentation, I will call the second order trio, single or double, a tactus trio, as its shortest duration aligns with the tactus level. And the first order trio, single or double, will be called a subtactus trio, as its shortest duration is shorter than the duration of a tactus. Now, single and double trios can occur at the tactus or subtactus level, and therefore this generates 4 unique rhythms that express this outcast motif. From smallest to largest and left to right, top to bottom on the screen, as the single subtactus trio, the double subtactus trio, the single tactus trio, and the double tactus trio. And you can see each of these written out, and you can also see that the double subtactus trio and the single tactus trio take up the same amount of time, just different in how they articulate the beat. Oh, that's not good. They changed now?
Okay.
Great. All right. Moving on to the musical aspects, Jesus of Suburbia is the second track on the album and introduces our main character and the setting. Because it has much to do, this track spans over 9 minutes long and is divided into 5 movements. It also creates a grandiose introduction to the album, as this is a format the band has not taken on before. In all previous albums, the tracks sit around 3 minutes, and now this song triples that length. So this is a marked increase in duration that provides an excellent way to grab the audience's attention. Turning now to see how Green Day uses the rhythms discussed above, this song opens with a single tactus trisio played on the guitar, seen in Figure 3, while the meter is duple. Each event of the trisio voices the same chord, thus highlighting the rhythm. The first line of the verse comes in, and the guitar punctuates the line with a single tactus trisio on a different chord. The iteration of the trisio happens in every verse of this section. And we can go ahead and listen, hopefully.
I'm just trying to write you love. The Jesus of suburbia, the Bible love. None of the above. Only steady dying love.
Opening the story with rhythmic dissonance immediately defines the personality of Jesus. That being said, rhythmic dissonance is replete within popular music. In her article, Formal Functions of Metric Dissonance in Rock Music, Biamonte finds 3 different types of dissonance: rhythmic, metric, and hypermetric dissonance. Rhythmic dissonance focuses on disruption at the tactus level and can be displacement or grouping dissonance as defined by Krebs. Metric dissonance occurs at the bar level, adding or dropping beats, disrupting the expected 4/4 pattern. And the third metric dissonance is caused by elision or elongation of phrase length. And for the purposes of this article, we are focusing on rhythmic dissonance. And in her section of rhythmic dissonance, Biamonte discusses displacement dissonance, but this is so common within popular music that it is almost an unmarked category. What I'm discussing here is grouping dissonance. And Biamonte specifically addresses a double trisio used in another song and says, quote, "The pattern begins and ends in alignment with the 4/4 meter, but is out of phase in the middle, creating tension within the body of the phrase." The reference trisio forms a double tactus trisio, which disrupts the bar line, as we saw in Figure 2. But the motif present here is a single tactus trisio. But this logic still applies as it is out of phrase at the half measure. This motif also falls in line with Walser's description of the function of rhythm in heavy metal. In Beyond the Vocals, Walser says the role of pulse in heavy metal is to, quote, articulate control of time and energy. And then other elements like, quote, guitar chords pull away from that control and return into alignment with it, end quote. So within Jesus of Suburbia, the outcast motif represents Jesus not fitting in with his hometown, but it's played in the accompaniment. This puts it underneath the surface and into Jesus's subconsciousness. It's clear to the audience he does not fit in, but he himself does not register it. Jesus also sings very square verses, and this further substantiates this claim as it provides a contrast. Later, the motif will shift into a melodic role or into the vocals, and this happens as different characters become more aware of their role outside of societal norms. Jesus alludes to this awareness of his difference at the end of this movement, where the drum and guitar perform a call and response that mimic the verse. Here, the drums are where the vocals should be, and their statement of the rhythmic motif signals Jesus's initial internal consideration of his identity, and a simplified version of this pattern is shown in Figure 4. And we will go ahead and listen to that. This movement also sets the precedent that duple meter represents society's constraint and suburbia specifically. While most of the songs are in duple, this one introduces us to suburbia and sets the outcast motif in contrast to it. Now my slides are changing on Zoom, but not on the screen. Okay. Let's see, where do I want to be? Oh, I guess we'll just have to use our ears. Oh, great. Yeah, let's just focus on this one. Moving on to the last movement, it opens with a variation of a double subtactus trisio. The meter is still in a straight duple meter as Jesus says goodbye to his hometown. The motif, now in the bass, continues through the verses as Jesus hopes he'll find a place in the city. During the chorus, the motif appears as a double subtactus trisio in the vocals and instruments as it resurfaces in Jesus' consciousness. So let's see. Here's the opening of that song. Starting here. And then here's the chorus where it goes up in the vocals. Here. Throughout Jesus of Suburbia and the rest of the songs, the pulse acts as representation of society's control, and the motif represents Jesus not fitting into the grid. As stated earlier, the motifs in Jesus of Suburbia are single tactus trisios or double subtactus trisios, which are two of the more disruptive types. Therefore, not only does Jesus not fit in, but it is quite explicit to the listener how much he does not fall in line, even if it's not always obvious to himself. The Outcast motif appears again in St. Jimmy, which is the 6th track on the album. Before this, Jesus has met the Waiting, his group of friends, and now Jesus creates St. Jimmy to fit in. The audience knows that he is not another character, as lyrics from other songs say, quote, "The St. Jimmy is a figment of your father's rage and your mother's love," and quote, "Jimmy died today, it's my own private suicide," end quote. This alter ego is extremely extroverted, bombastic, and ready to take charge. The motif appears in the bridge directly after the second chorus, and the listener has entrained to the fast tempo of the song, and there's a count off that we can listen to almost at the beginning.
St. Jimmy's coming down across the alleyway, up on the boulevard like a zip gun on parade. Lights on the silhouette, he's just a buttonette, coming at you on the count
Here.
of 1.
Therefore, when this single trisio comes in and it repeats 4 times, the listener hears it as a tactus trisio, disrupting a full measure. After a short interlude of the motif appears again and is repeated 6 times, but is always followed by a measure of 4/4 until it's repeated back to back before going back into the straight duple timing of the song. Now it's repeated. The motif appears noticeably more in this song than the previous one. To create St. Jimmy, Jesus uses his experience as an outcast to characterize this persona. To show this musically, the band uses the outcast motif. Here, the motif frees Jesus, or St. Jimmy, from the meter as he takes pride in his outcast identity. To punctuate this, the outro has the guitar play a single tactus trisio twice before the band ends the song with one final, extremely accented motif. And we can listen to that.
It's St. Jimmy, and that's my name. And don't wear it out.
Finally, the motif appears in the melody of the instrumental break. This represents Jesus consciously calling up the image of an outcast to portray St. Jimmy. The motif later becomes strictly rhythmic as the song continues and Jesus finds acceptance as an outcast in a group of other outcasts. Homecoming is the 12th and penultimate track. Like Jesus of Suburbia, this song also spans 9 minutes and is split into 5 movements. It details Jesus' decision to leave the city and return to suburbia after losing the Waiting and what's-her-name. He lost the one thing that mattered to him, so he begins to look at alternatives to living in the city. The outcast motif appears several times in Homecoming and only in movement 1. The suite starts with voice and guitar, and the motif enters after. The guitar plays the melody of the verse, which is made up of 4 lines, and the motif ends the second and fourth lines. The motif now appears as a single subtactus treceo, the least disruptive form. The chorus is very similar to the verse with the motif ending lines 2 and 4, but this time the motif is pitched up a third to fit the melody. On what I will call the last verse, the motif ends the guitar solo and lines 2, 3, and 4, a marked increase leading to the final chorus, where it again ends lines 2 and 4. The final chorus says, Jimmy died today. He blew his brains out into the bay. In the state of mind, it's my own private suicide, with the treceo falling on the words into the bay and suicide, and the last motif of the album on the word suicide.
What you need is a crutch.
Guitar solo. The first motif.
In the crowd of pain, St. Jimmy comes without any shame. He says we're fucked up, but we're not the same. That mom and dad are the ones you can blame. Jimmy died today. He blew his brains out into the bay. In the state of mind, it's my own private suicide.
The use of the outcast motif here is quite symbolic. Unlike the other songs, the motif shortens to the subtactus level. The motif can no longer disrupt full bars, only half notes. Furthermore, the motif occupies a melodic role in the vocals as well as instrumentals, so Jesus being an outcast is at the forefront of his mind and weighing heavily on him. Jesus has lived in the city for a while now, 20 years if you take the lyrics of Wake Me Up When September Ends literally. And he has pushed St. Jimmy inside of himself. His rebelliousness, his self-acclaimed outcast identity that used to be a key feature of himself no longer serves him, and it needs to be put away so he can work a real job. But he misses it. He thinks about that part of himself constantly distracting him from the life he has in front of him. That's why, at the end of the song, the motif ends on the lyric suicide, and thus Jesus abandons his alter ego, never to be seen again in favor of a more normal life. Through the foregoing analysis, I have documented unique ways in which Green Day uses rhythmic figures to portray meaning. I've also generated more literature on the punk genre that can be built upon in further research. I have built upon Biamonte's, David Geary's, and de Klerk's research and shown how all of their concepts can be used in concept albums. My research can also be used to tie musicological research as it expands on Wolfson's research on concept album and Walser's Running with the Devil. I hope this research inspires more people to delve into narrativity in popular music, as it is a rich source of literature and has not been covered. As Wagner coined the use of leitmotifs in opera, and John Williams brought them into the world of film scores, there are so many concept albums that could be studied to see if this is a common phenomenon within concept albums. Examples such as Danger Days or Welcome to the Black Parade by My Chemical Romance, or The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars by David Bowie would be ripe for analysis. Finally, I hope to convince more people to study punk music in all aspects of the genre is often put to the side in favor of more common genres. Thank you.
Yes, did you? I'm so sorry. Could
No,
you
you're good.
like unplug it and plug it back in? I'd love to see some of the figures that you
Hmm.
use.
Let's see. I sure hope this works. Hmm. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I could just turn the computer around and you guys could all like huddle together, right? Yeah, sorry about that. It will, yeah. And I'll go ahead and switch it to my bibliography so they can look at that. Yes,
You mentioned that it is a process opera.
yes.
I want to know what elements you have that lead you to believe that it is an operatic
Yeah, so that term was actually coined by Billy Joe himself. And he wanted to sort of create this like huge like album spanning narrative that like sort of enters into the idea of an opera in that like it's like this crazy tale where like and it consists of mostly singing, and it even reached Broadway, where it became it's just American Idiot as a Broadway show, and they added more songs, they added more characters, more songs from other albums that they created later. But yeah, that term rock opera I take from Billy Joe, as that's what he calls this work of his. So yeah. Yeah.
Since you're interested, right, in the concept album considers the way that you're saying, I was just running through like other examples, right?
Yeah.
The album that popped out of you, like open rhythm in the title track is the play on the double version of
Mhm. Yeah.
and especially if you're something that kind of goes against like regular meter versus this kind of rhythmic play.
Mhm.
So even the way that rhythm then alternates with the bass drum on straight chord.
Right.
Right, so you've got syncopated.
Yeah.
Back and forth, upbeat oriented rhythms versus.
Downbeat. Yeah. Really heavy.
Or even in like arpeggiated.
Yes. I'm really excited because I don't talk about American Idiot, the track, in my thesis, but I do mention American Idiot in just about most of the other songs, because a version of this motif crops up in all of them. And so in Wake Me Up When September Ends, where it's not a 3-3-2, it's a 3-2-3. I sort of like use that as, so in the story of American Idiot, Wake Me Up When September Ends comes after Letter Bomb. Letter Bomb is when what's her name has broken up with Jesus, and so now Jesus is very depressed, and just kind of like sitting there. And so like the fact that he even gets like such a core part of himself that's been here from the beginning as a 3-3-2, and now he transforms it into a 3-2-3. Like he can't even get that right. Like he's just like failing at everything, right? After he's lost the woman he thought he loved. So yeah.
I wonder if you concept album, you mentioned, I mean, what you mentioned, Bowie, you mentioned.
My Chemical Romance. Mhm.
One specific article I would suggest you look at is, John Kovach has a nice essay on Close to the Edge.
Mhm.
Sort of like, so it's not a full concept album, like a 20-minute song, 20-minute speed.
Yeah.
And a lot of what he's doing is he's tracing not just a particular rhythmic leitmotif,
Mhm.
but the way that a rhythmic dissonance is resolved over the course of the composition.
Well, that's
So it
interesting.
starts with, it starts with sort of a syncopated in here, then it turns into real metric dissonance.
Mhm.
It resolves itself like in the third time. So it gives you a way of saying it's not just like the usual problem with the way people like to think about the calling card. It's just
Right.
the same thing over and over again. But to think about, is there a change
Mhm.
in what happens? Does that help to tell the story?
Yeah. Well, that's a fantastic article. I'll have to look into it.
Connecting to that, honestly, what it reminded me of is like the hero's journey. Like,
Mhm.
it's like a departure, you go through a series of events, then it's a return.
Yeah.
And that connection as well would be a really cool thing to like narratively wrap it up. in a
Absolutely.
way Where it's like
Yeah.
they're a rebel, of course, but they're also a hero.
Yeah.
That goes through.
An unwilling hero
Yes.
at that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. of
Yeah.
American Idiot.
They're the American Idiot. Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
I have so much to say, and we'll talk about it later, because I'm writing about a lot of this stuff in Renaissance music, so. I was curious how you ended up, or if you can talk to me about the ways you see the difference between grouping dissonance, which
Mhm.
you're playing this,
Yeah.
as and syncopation.
Syncopation.
And
Yeah.
then also how you feel that it sort of, this sort of single instances of disruption, right? When you have out of nowhere one of these versus when it gets looped in, it just sort of becomes a groove.
Right.
Which I think those sort of operate differently.
Yeah, so like there's a point where this almost becomes a groove, which you heard in St. Jimmy, right? Where it's just like dee da da dee da da. And but then they end up cutting it off and they go da 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 da, and then they hold out that note, and then the drums come in with like a really steady 4 pulse. And so they never really let it become a groove. They really want to articulate that like 4/4 metric feel. throughout the whole album, honestly. And then relating it to oh, what is it? Syncopation. Where there's just like a ton of syncopation, kind of like just within within popular music and within punk in general. And so kind of like what I find interesting is that a lot of these instances, they don't start on like an offbeat. They start on the downbeat. And then so that's kind of like how I reflected, like conflicting with the groove, is that like it starts in time and then it gets out of time, and then by the end of the measure it's back in time.
And this is the first example where actually it's for the drums come
Yeah.
in. And so you actually don't have the 4/4 frame of reference, and there's nothing to tell you that it's dissonance. In
Mhm.
fact, it's just this sort of wonderful ambivalence.
It's just him.
ambiguity that
Yeah.
you don't know where we are yet. And then the drums come in, you're like, oh, now in retrospect, I understand what that is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Pull the
that's
voice right out, please.
raging love. Yeah, very
Like,
straight.
in that opening, it actually reminded me of like Haydn when he writes in B minor.
Yeah.
Like, it often opens ambiguously, you don't know if you're in B major or B minor.
Yeah.
It could be either, and it doesn't get resolved off for a few measures, and it's the same sense of like, I have information that doesn't add up yet.
Right. Yeah. Great. Thank you.